Good evening, everybody. How are you? Good. My name is Howie Schneider. I'm the Dean of the School of Journalism here at Stony Brook University, and I want to welcome you to the annual Marie Colvin Lecture Series, which brings one of the world's top foreign correspondents to the university. This is our 5th lecture in the series. Prior speakers have been Christiana Amanpour, Clarissa Ward from CNN, Ann Curry, previously from NBC News, and Rukmini Callimachi, who covers ISIS for the New York Times. And tonight we have another very accomplished correspondent and a distinguished speaker. I want to ask you a question. How many of you have been to any of the other prior talks in this series? That's great. But some of you have not. So very briefly, I want to talk to you about the genesis of this program and about that face that is staring at you from this screen. Very glamorous looking face with the black eye patch. That's Marie Colvin, who was arguably the most courageous foreign correspondent of her generation, who spent 30 years roaming the globe, covering every hot spot imaginable: the Mideast, the Balkans, Chechnya, risking her life to do on-the-ground reporting in order to alert the world to what was happening in a lot of these places where innocent women and children were being trapped in the crossfire of war. In 1999, she made international headlines when she refused to evacuate a UN camp that was under attack by Indonesian forces in East Timor because there were 1,500 women and children in that camp, and she didn't want to leave them. So she continued to report at great risk to herself. Eventually, those 1,500 women and children were saved. She lost an eye, I guess that's her left eye, in a hand grenade attack in Sri Lanka. But that didn't stop her. It didn't stop her at all. In February of 2012, Marie Colvin was killed covering the war in Syria. She was reporting from a place called Homs, which was under siege. Marie's family filed a claim in federal court this past summer, saying that they believe that she was targeted by top officials in the Assad regime who wanted to silence her reporting. I think if Marie were alive today, she would be horrified to know that more than 400,000 people have been killed in the war in Syria, including many women and children, many children. I think she would have been just as horrified, though, if the reporting stopped. Here's what she wrote about what she did and what she was really worried about. She said, "Going to these places, finding out what is happening is the only way to get to the truth. Despite all the videos you see on television, what's on the ground has remained remarkably the same for the past 100 years. I find craters, burnt houses, women weeping for sons and daughters, suffering. In my profession, there is no chance of unemployment. The real difficulty is having enough faith in humanity to believe that someone will care. That someone will care." And here at Stony Brook, we discovered after Marie was killed that she grew up on Long Island. I mean, doesn't everybody grow up on Long Island, right? And we felt that we had to honor her work and legacy by doing something special. So along with Marie's family, we started the Marie Colvin Center here at Stony Brook for International Reporting. And what the center does is several things. It supports our students at the journalism school on overseas trips that we now take, reporting trips in the winter and the summer. Our students have been to China, Russia, Cuba, Kenya, India, Turkey, and South Korea on these trips, learning how to report. This summer, we're going into the rainforest in Ecuador. So this is an amazing opportunity for our students. And the center also supports this lecture series and other activities to try to keep not only Marie's memory alive and her work, honor her work, but to reinforce why we all need to care about having people on the ground who can be eyewitnesses for us and tell us what's happening around the world. I want to introduce a few people tonight. First, I want to introduce members of Marie Colvin's family who are here tonight. I'd like Marie's sister Kathleen and brother Billy to stand and just be recognized, okay? And it's through the generosity of the Colvin family and other people who have helped raise money. We support the center funding from people who have come forward to help us, who want to continue to grow and nurture the next generation of Marie Colvins, and it has never been more important. And now I would like to proudly introduce tonight's speaker. For a couple of reasons, I'm very proud to introduce her. One, she is one of the world's most accomplished foreign correspondents. She is the international editor for Channel 4 News in London, and we don't get to see that very often, but that's an hour-long, serious, 1 hour-long show every night in Britain, news show. She also has roamed the globe for the past 20 or 30 years. She's covered Iraq and Afghanistan. She's been in the Ukraine. She's been in China. Covering the migrant crisis, she's both reported the migrant crisis from Europe and has reported it from inside Syria. There's another special reason she's here tonight. She was a very close friend of Marie Colvin's. They worked side by side, risking their lives all over the world. They had dinner in Beirut a week before Marie Colvin was killed, and they spoke via Skype the night before Marie Colvin was killed. And finally, she has been embedded for the last 4 months, not in the U.S. Army or in a foreign force overseas, but she's been embedded in the journalism school here, mentoring our students, visiting our classes, talking about what it's been like for her and the kind of qualities we'll need in the next generation of journalists. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming Lindey Hilsum.
Thank you very much, Howie, and thank you all for coming here tonight. I got to know Marie in 1998. There was a small and utterly futile war had broken out in the Horn of Africa between Eritrea and Ethiopia. It was one of those wars where, you know, there's a desert and there's some huts and some goats and there's a border. Is it here? Is it there? Is it there? It doesn't matter to the goats and the people, but it mattered to the governments. So they started a war. And it was that situation which the 1930s journalist H.R. Knickerbocker once described, where all the sane people are trying to get out, and there's a little bunch of madmen trying to get in. And the little bunch of madmen and women are the journalists. And that was exactly how it was. So we managed to get to Djibouti. Djibouti is the hottest place on earth. It is hell. But that is where there were small Ukrainian planes coming out of Eritrea, and they were landing in Djibouti. It was a Somali airline. Yes, this gets worse. A Somali airline called Darlo Airlines, which had bought some second or possibly third-hand planes from Ukraine and the Ukrainian pilots. So anyway, we persuaded them to take us to Eritrea, and we walked across the tarmac, which was, you know, sort of moving in the heat, slightly melting, and I ended up walking with Marie. And so we get on the plane and we sit next to each other, and as it taxis along, suddenly something flies past the window, And we looked at that and we realized that it's the pilot's shirts. That it's so hot, they've taken them off and wrung them out and hung them on the wings to dry and forgotten to put them back on. So our pilots, who are these two enormous Ukrainian guys, are flying bare-chested. So then the plane takes off, and as it takes off, all the camera equipment, because there were several television crews on board, including my own crew, slips down the aisle like this, past us. And I looked, and it was completely unsecured. So I looked at Marie, and Marie looked at me, and we giggled like 13-year-olds being naughty in class. We just laughed so much. It was just such a crazy situation. We just couldn't stop laughing. And so that was when we became friends, when we very nearly plunged to our death from the skies above the Red Sea. And you know, that is one of the things that makes this job a wonderful thing to do. Because yes, we go to very horrible places and miserable places and sad places and difficult places, and I will talk about all that. But that camaraderie and those friendships on the road are like no other friendships that you have. And for me, Marie, well, I like to think of us as the Thelma and Louise of the press corps, you know. She was my partner in crime. But first I'm going to talk about a place where I was, where there was no Marie. And in fact, there were no comrades at all, which was Rwanda. In 1994, when the genocide broke out, that was probably the only occasion when I was so completely alone. My career had taken a nosedive. So for you journalist students out there, it happens. Things go well and then they don't go well. And I had resigned from the BBC and I had no job. I was freelance, but actually that was a euphemism. I was unemployed. And then I managed to get myself a job with the UN Children's Fund in Rwanda, writing some tedious newsletter or something. But anyway, what the hell, I had a job. So I went to Rwanda. And that was how I happened to be in Rwanda. So I went there in February 1994. And I realized that things were not good in Rwanda. And then that meant that I just happened to be there on April the 6th, 1994, which is when the plane carrying the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi was shot down over Kigali airport and the genocide started. And I have to tell you, it's a very different situation to fly into a war zone where you've done some reading and you have some idea of what's going on, you know why you're going. That's very different from when things start to erupt around you. And remember, this is before the internet and it's before mobile phones. I had a landline in my house. And I started to ring the Rwandans who I knew, who worked for the UN, and they started to ring me. And they all said, come and save us, we're being killed. And I couldn't save them. I didn't know where they lived. I didn't know how to get there. They said, well, if you can't come and save us, can you write down my last words? Because I'll be killed today or tomorrow. Write them down for my mother or my husband or whoever. So I wrote them down. That's what I did. I sat there. I was a scribe. I wrote down their last words. And eventually, I would try and go out, and there was a soldier who stopped me going out. And eventually, I think it was day 3 or day 4, I thought, I've got to go out. I've just got to go. So I got up, and I got into my car, and there was a roadblock. Which was, I mean, I presume you know something about what happened in Rwanda. So there was a roadblock with drunken guys with the red eyes and the beer bottles and the machetes and the dead bodies at the side, and I just drove through. So I got to the Red Cross. And when I got to the Red Cross, I committed a war crime. Did you know that it is a war crime to pose as a Red Cross worker? Well, I did it. And the head of the Red Cross said to me, put this on and pretend to be a Red Cross worker, because we need journalists. We need eyewitnesses. We need someone to tell the world what is going on. And you happen to be the only one here. There was a Belgian woman as well, but she couldn't go out because Belgians were being targeted. 10 Belgian peacekeepers had been slaughtered by the killers on the first day. So I went out with the Red Cross and did my best. And I saw terrible things, not all of which I'm going to tell you tonight. And I reported for pretty much everybody who had my phone number and everybody I could get hold of, I reported for. And I'm not particularly proud of the reporting I did. I don't think it was particularly good. It was the best I could do in the situation I was in. And of course, Rwanda was a genocide. And it was not a time when we used that word very much. We didn't really use it except for the Holocaust. It was back in '94. People didn't think about that. And afterwards, there was a whole discussion about why there had been no intervention, that somebody should have gone in and done something about it. And it's true that you could have stopped it. There was a peacekeeping force there, that many of them were not armed. And after the Belgians were disarmed and killed, the Belgian peacekeepers, there was a small contingent of Belgians, after they were killed right at the beginning, everybody got scared. And the Bangladeshis and the Ethiopians were ill-equipped, and there was really just one small unit of West African troops who did an amazing job on saving people. So there's no question that if, Americans, British, had gone in large enough numbers, could have done something about it. So why didn't they? And the reason they didn't is because of Somalia. Because a few years earlier, the Americans had gone into Somalia, and there had been an incident with a Black Hawk helicopter, some of you will remember this, which came down, which was shot down, and the American service personnel on board were not just killed, they were dragged through the streets, their bodies were dragged through the streets and humiliated. So that's what happens with intervention, that politicians and generals are always reacting to the last war, to not what's going on now, but to what happened last time and how to avoid what happened last time. And so that was why there was no intervention. Even though it was a genocide, and under international law, you certainly have the right to intervene, if not the obligation to intervene. And in fact, the American government didn't use the word genocide when describing what was going on, specifically because they didn't want to have that discussion about whether they had an obligation to intervene. And they could have intervened because it was a time when Yeltsin was in power in Russia. The Russians had no particular interests in Central Africa, and so I don't think there would have been a problem with the Security Council resolution, because that, I think, is important. When we talk about intervention, it's also about how the international system works. And one of my criticisms of American intervention is not going through the systems that we have, because that is why we're in the mess we are today. So you had Bosnia. You had another massacre, Srebrenica. Nobody intervened until too late. 7,000 men and boys killed. Intervention came eventually, but too late. And then we fast forward. We fast forward to Iraq. Intervention, for all the wrong reasons, at the wrong time. There was no genocide in Iraq going on in 2003. There was no hot war. Yes, Saddam Hussein was an appalling tyrant, but the massacres he had committed had been back in 1988 when he gassed the Kurds. There was no good reason to go in 2003. A lot of Iraqis wanted American intervention, though. I was there at the time in Baghdad. Actually, I was also in Belgrade during Kosovo. I have a bad habit of always being bombed by my own side. So, I was in Belgrade during the Kosovo intervention, so I was being bombed by NATO. And then I was in Baghdad during that intervention, being bombed by the Americans. But I always think it's more interesting to be on the losing side, somehow journalistically. It's just more stimulating. And being with the winners, they're cocky, they normally... Anyway, that's my view of the matter. Anyway, so there I was in Baghdad. And, when... a lot of Iraqis I knew had been imprisoned under Saddam. They thought nothing could be worse than Saddam Hussein. Well, be careful what you wish for. That's what the Chinese say, isn't it? And I remember on day one of when the Americans came into the city, into Baghdad. Of course, we'd had 3 weeks of being bombed and all this stuff. And then they finally come in these huge tanks. And Iraqis... sort of came out of their houses like this, and it's like, oh God, what do we do? What do we do now? So Saddam's no longer in power. Ooh, it's not sure. And also, they saw these tanks, and then they saw journalists with TV cameras. Now, people knew in Iraq what to do if they saw a TV camera, because what you had to do was always praise Saddam Hussein. So if you saw a TV camera, you started jumping up and down and chanting in Arabic, "With my blood and my spirit, I redeem thee, O Saddam." Simple, you know what to do. what do you do now? There's the Americans, there's the TV camera. So I can remember this little bunch of Iraqis talking to each other, and then they came out and they worked it out. And they started chanting and waving their arms. They said, "With my blood and my spirit, I redeem thee, O George Bush." Simple, they got it sussed. And there was actually quite a lot of relief. They thought things were going to get better. That was day one. Now I'm going to show you a story about day two. And I think that this is a story which gives you some idea of why it went so horribly wrong. This is just our experience, my team's experience on day two. And the sound isn't perfect, and so I hope you'll excuse that, but it was quite a long time ago, and we were in the middle of a war zone. So can we play the video?
We approach cautiously. The Marines had secured Saddam Hussein's Adamir Palace only a few hours earlier, and everyone was jumping.
Who do you work for? British Television, Channel 4 News.
We were soon to find out how jumpy. They were sitting, waiting, on alert. At 4 a.m. they'd moved in and the firefight had been fierce. They were on a manhunt.
Tell us what's happening here. Why are you here?
Well, we got word last night that Saddam and his son were here, so we came down here to find out.
Any sign of them?
No. No, we ain't seen nothing. Came in, just been taking a lot of small arms RPG fire. The entire right here and all around this place has been a lot of small arms, a lot of RPG fire. But as far as inside there, we hadn't seen nobody.
They said there had been shooting from the mosque opposite, now pockmarked with return fire. Fanatical fighters from other Arab countries are said to be the holdouts rather than Iraqis. We heard periodic shots from the American snipers above. They're warning to drivers to stop the car. But some people don't understand and speed up. A blue Volkswagen passed. A few minutes later, we realized the car which followed it had been hit. The Marines wouldn't cross into enemy territory, but our translator, Mohammed Fatnan, insisted on going to investigate. Thank goodness he did. As he ran back towards us, we realized that something terrible had happened. 6-year-old Zahra Abdel Samia had been in the back of the car which was shot. She had a head wound.
2 more.
Oh, no.
As the Marines cleaned up her injury, we learned that her aunt and the driver were also injured. They didn't want us to film. We pointed out that they had shot her, and it was only because of Mohammed that they had any chance of saving her now. Back across the street, worse news. A man who had come onto his balcony to see what had happened had been killed elsewhere. His relatives and neighbours, in shock and disbelief, shouting to God to help them. As they took Zahra on a stretcher to be airlifted to a field hospital, we walked further into the palace compound. There wasn't much left of the luxurious dwelling built at the height of Saddam Hussein's powers in the late 1980s. The Marines were still searching for potential threats. They said 38 of their number had been injured in the morning's fighting.
So this is all that remains of one of Saddam's palaces. Now it's a communications centre for the Marines. They've moved in, most of it's destroyed, and whatever's left they'll use. They, of course, are joyous and triumphant. I have to say, after what we've seen with the little girl who was injured and the other people, it's very hard to feel that this is another great day for Baghdad.
Suddenly, a rocket-propelled grenade. Inevitably, the snipers on the roof returned fire. Those shots hit these people, although they hadn't fired the RPG. They'd been in a van along the road. The driver was killed, the car careered out of control. The newly injured were taken to the helicopter, which was to airlift out little Zahra. The Marines are nervy. They fear all civilians could be suicide bombers. They reach for their guns and just shoot. Yesterday, we saw rejoicing and hope. But today, we saw just grief.
And they patched her up, and she had a brain injury, but it wasn't fatal, and she had to have epilepsy medicine from then onwards, and Mohammed made sure that she got it. And then eventually she and her family moved to Kurdistan to the north, which was safer, and I haven't been in touch with them for a few years now, but she was all right. Mohammed was not all right. Mohammed, in the war that started afterwards, which was triggered by the American intervention, the war between Shiites and Sunnis, different branches of Islam in Iraq. Mohammed's very obviously Shia, and he was taken off a bus and he disappeared. And that was that. And I miss him still. I loved him very much. And you saw what a brave man he was, because without him, Zara would be dead. And in fact, we saw 8 people killed on that day. And that was because the Americans had not put up a sign. If they had put up a sign in Arabic saying, "Don't drive down this road," none of those people would be killed. Would have been killed. It's quite simple. It's because they didn't know. And that's a sign of the lack of preparation on day 2 of Iraq. And that it's had so many ramifications, because that is why the Iraqis turned so much against the Americans, who they had initially welcomed. And that is why you then got so much rebellion against the Americans, and then the radicalization which came in. And Baghdadi, who now leads ISIS in Syria and Iraq, he was radicalized in an American prison in Iraq. And so all of this connects up because of an intervention which also had not gone properly through the United Nations, because they did not go for a second resolution, because they knew that the Russians would veto it and the French would abstain. And actually, you know, the Russians and the French were right, and the British and the Americans were wrong. And so much has flowed from that. So I'm going to fast forward again to the Arab Spring in 2011 and Libya. Revolution to overthrow Gaddafi. Alhamdulillah, he was a really bad dude. And it started on February the 17th, and I think I got there on the 21st, which wasn't too bad, to Benghazi, which was the cradle of the revolution. And by then the East had sort of split off. That the East, they'd overthrown Gaddafi, and in the West he was still in power. And the revolutionaries, okay, look, I can't help myself. I couldn't help but like the revolutionaries. You know, they were completely insane, and they were very badly disciplined. And I remember going to the front line one day, and there were 2 very young ones, and I said to one, "What do you do normally?" He said, "I'm an English teacher." And I said, "And why have you joined the revolution?" He said, "Because Kennedy said, ask not what your country does for you, but what you can do for your country." And then the other one came up to me, and I said, "Well, you look a bit sad, what's wrong with you?" He said, "A bit is missing from my weapon." I said, "I'm awfully sorry about that. Which bit?" He said, "I don't know." And I looked at him and I said, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 17. And then, I sound like such an old bat, I heard myself saying, "Does your mother know you're here?" So it was hard not to sympathize with them. And then Gaddafi sent tanks and armored personnel carriers down the road to destroy the revolution. And he said he would hunt the people down like rats. And I believed him. And the reason I believed him was because there had been an occasion before when there had been 1,700 political prisoners in a prison called Abu Salim in Tripoli, where they had got all of the prisoners to go into the central courtyard, and they had put sharpshooters all around the roof at the top, and they had slaughtered the lot in a single day. That was what Gaddafi was like. That was why the people rebelled against him. So when a UN Security Council resolution was passed to intervene, I was happy. I was happy because I was in Benghazi, and I thought that we would all be slaughtered. And I thought that maybe 1 million people, which was what they would have all have fled to Egypt. I did flee. My editor ordered me to flee, and then I had to get back again. And, you know, Srebrenica, Rwanda, the times when you don't intervene, that's what Benghazi would have been if they hadn't intervened. But they took it too far. They pushed it too far, and they overthrew Gaddafi. And the Russians, who had supported the Security Council resolution, Gaddafi was an ally of theirs, not a big ally, not an important one, but they felt they pushed it too far. They shouldn't have done that. And so then you end up in Syria, where Assad is a very important ally for the Russians. The Russians have a naval base at Tartus. It's very important to them. And they feel that the Americans have just taken the mickey with this intervention with Iraq and with pushing it too far in Libya. So they weren't ever going to do anything. So we end up in the mess we're in now. And Assad used chemical weapons, which is against international law, to use chemical weapons, and he didn't have to pay any price. And by not intervening when he used chemical weapons, that gave the green light to Assad and to the Russians to commit as many war crimes and crimes against humanity as they want. And that's what they are doing this very night. Because the people who are being killed in Syria at the moment are not, on the whole, being killed by ISIS. ISIS controls an area with a small number of people in. They're being killed by barrel bombs out of Syrian helicopters, bombs being dropped by Russian aircraft. 90% or possibly more of the killings in Syria are by the Syrian government forces and by the Russians. And we're standing on one side and doing nothing. And we have put ourselves into a situation where it's very difficult to do anything else. And that's why you have a lot of refugees. And of course, in Europe, we have vast numbers of refugees coming. So the summer before last, I spent a lot of time in Europe traveling with refugees. And again, you know, people say, they say, oh God, your job's so hard, you must be so miserable and so on. You know, I love the refugees because refugees travel in hope. Refugees are the people who think they're going to create a new life. And, you know, for most of them it will be difficult. But you look at the children and you think, you know, Einstein's in there somewhere, or a poet, or somebody who's going to do something amazing. And it's, you know, those individual stories. Journalists use words like human interest and colour. I hate those words. They are the story. The stories of these refugees are the story. So I'm going to show you, before I end, I'm going to show you another story. This is a story which I did the summer before last when I was traveling with refugees on the train. They come from Turkey by boat across to Greece, and then they cross the border into Macedonia. So now they're on a train going from Macedonia up to Serbia, and they were all heading for Germany and Austria. So this is the story of the train.
Night falls, but they keep on walking. Only a few more yards, and they'll have left Greece behind. They'll be in Macedonia. By morning, they're still walking. Word has travelled back down the line. Go to Gevgelia station. Some have spent the night here. They've seen worse places on their odyssey. It's dirty, but they do their best. The Macedonians have managed to put order into chaos despite the swelling numbers. Syrians and others with small children are given priority. Extra trains have been laid on to take them to the next border with Serbia. It's 110 miles away, a 4-hour journey, easy compared to what they've been through before. They've paid 10 euros per ticket, like any other passenger.
Where are you from?
We are from Syria.
From Syria. From which place?
Aleppo, Afrin.
From Aleppo and Afrin.
Yes.
From Afrin.
Kurdish.
The UN High Commission for Refugees says 7,000 travelled to Serbia this past weekend.
Many people on this train are going from Syria to Germany. So they're about halfway through their journey. And this is the point where they're full of hope. They're on the move. They think they've left the worst behind them. Germany has said it'll take 800,000 people this year. That's a lot. But there are many more trains behind this one. They can't take everyone. And there are thousands more people on the way.
Some are fleeing Aleppo and Bashar al-Assad, others Raqqa and Daesh, the Islamic State. What difference does it make?
Hard situation in Syria, no power, no water, no internet, no any help for us. We can't stay in Syria, and Bashar al-Assad attack us every day, morning, every time. Our baby so afraid of flighter sound.
Of the bombs, of the
of
sound.
bomb and shoulder, the guns, every day. So we live.
Daesh, beheading. They cut off hands for any reason. They'll always find an excuse to kill any human being. They have no problem in killing even children. Young children have been slaughtered, flogged, even women. Daesh has no mercy at all. They have nothing to do with religion or Islam or humanity.
It's the sleep of total exhaustion, born of weeks on the road and years of war. Dreaming, maybe, of the way life used to be before the bombs and the men in black masks, when you could live and work and bring up your children in Syria. Dreaming of the way life could yet be if Germany makes good on its promise or Austria lets them in. Not every traveller is from Syria. Vida's here with her brother. She presented a TV sports program back home in Afghanistan until the death threats from those who hate women became too much.
One day I saw very, very bad things. They came and fight. Even they want to kill me with knife.
I'm just on a transit. That's why I'm in this train.
The Nigerians lost their jobs as cleaners in Istanbul, so they're moving on. Economic migrants, that's what they'll be called. Bottom of the hierarchy of desperation. Refugees, migrants, European politicians call them a burden. But maybe there's another way to look at it.
Why do you think Germany should agree to let you come in?
Because, I don't know, because they have a lot of old people and maybe they need young people, I think.
We're there, but not quite. Still another mile or so walk to the border. It's hot, but they keep going, even the kids. Those who can't yet walk, or not as well as they used to. Idlib. The border is somewhere in the field. No one knows when they've crossed it. But on the other side of the hill, the Serbian police are waiting.
You have a doctor?
Yes.
They're polite and welcoming. 23,000 people have entered Serbia this way in the last 2 weeks, 90,000 this year. But this is just a way station. There's a long road ahead through Hungary where the welcome is not so warm. It's the summer of mass migration. Those whom geography condemned to war have come to Europe, and European politicians have turned away. Lindey Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Serbia.
I nicked that line, those whom geography has condemned to war, from a poet called James Fenton, who I think is absolutely brilliant. And I think about that line a lot because we are the people whom geography did not condemn to war. How very lucky we are. And in your country and in mine, there is a lot of prejudice against refugees and migrants. I got more abuse on Twitter for those stories that summer than I have for any other stories I've done. Because our job as journalists is to be human beings, is to tell the story of human beings. Our former Prime Minister David Cameron referred to the refugees as a swarm. They are not a swarm. They are individuals. They are people, all of whom have stories. And yes, in amongst them there will be some terrorists. And yes, it is complicated. And no, not everybody can come. But our job as journalists is to show these human beings. And if we don't understand what's happening in Syria or Afghanistan or wherever, how will we ever understand why they are coming? And how will we know what kind of policy to have? And that's the job that we have to do as journalists. I've unlearned a lot of things in my career as a journalist. I'm certainly not as sure as I used to be on how to save the world. I've done a poor job on saving the world myself. It appears to be no better than when I started. But a few things I have learned. I think that sometimes you should have intervention if there is genocide or mass murder. And I think that the International Criminal Court is a good thing, and I think that America should join it. You know, there was a tribunal for Rwanda, which was one of the things that led up to the International Criminal Court. The tribunal for Rwanda. It has tried pretty much all of the leaders of the genocide, and pretty much all of them are now behind bars. It didn't stop it, but they paid a price. I testified at that tribunal. There's a lot of controversy about journalists testifying at tribunals. I did it because I was in a unique situation. I was the only journalist there. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do, and I did it because, for me, it laid history to rest. It was important to me to do that. So that's one of the things I've learned. The other thing I've learned is that journalists, we love drama, and we love massive characters. We love Muammar Gaddafi. We love Donald Trump, because they're such good copy. They are amazing. But you know what? Boring people are the most important. Why has Libya fallen apart? Libya has fallen apart because there is no state, because Gaddafi destroyed the state, and he replaced it with a mafia, his own family. And when the revolution happened, there was no state to keep going. There was nobody who was running the health service or paying people. It's important, paying civil servants, because if you don't pay them, they'll take up arms. And that's what happened in Libya. So I have gained a great respect for institutions and for, I hate to say this, bureaucrats. We journalists, we hate bureaucrats, but you know what? They make things work. And in my country as well as in yours, and you have this character coming to be your president now, what will make this country survive is your institutions and your boring people. Your people who keep things running, whatever the froth is on the surface. That's one of the things I've learned. I've learned that it's important that we're there. Even if we don't know what should be done, I think it's important that we tell the story so that people know, have some understanding of the refugees and migrants in their own communities. And there will be more and more refugees and migrants in your communities and in mine. And if we don't understand why they came or where they came from, then we can have no understanding of them. In Marie's last dispatch, which Harry mentioned, it was called The Widow's Basement. And it was about this basement where people were cowering from the mortars and the bombs, the mortars that killed her that horrible morning in February 5 years ago. And they said to her, "Why has the world abandoned us?" And she didn't have an answer, and I don't have an answer to either. We can't always answer that question. But what we can do is be there. And what we can do is report, as Marie did and as I try to do. Because in the end, what we are doing is we're witnessing history as it's happening. And if they turn around and say, well, we didn't know what was happening, we can say, yes, you did. You knew because we told you. Thank you very much. I think there's time for questions. So if anybody has any questions, comments, criticisms, primal screams, actually don't do the primal scream.
There are two mics here, one on either side, so don't be shy. This is your chance to ask some questions of Lindsay. So just come up on either side and begin to ask some questions, okay?
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jill Ryan. I'm a journalism student here at Stony Brook, and I was wondering, when you were talking about the genocide at Rwanda, how did you go about, you were alone, so how did you go about even starting to report on that? Is that when you immediately called the people that you knew at the UN?
Yeah.
Yes, and where did you go from there afterward?
Okay, so well, first of all, I thought, well, I better go to the airport because that's where the planes come down. And I called the BBC stringer, the local guy, and he said, you can't go to the airport, it's the middle of the night and you'll be killed, there are roadblocks everywhere, men with machetes. So I thought, okay, maybe that wasn't one of my better ideas. And so I didn't do that. And so I just rang everybody I knew. I mean, I rang General Dallaire and I talked to him, and I just rang everybody because that was, and then people started to ring me. So that was what I did. And then, as I said, on the third day, I went out with the Red Cross, and then later I went out with the UN. There was a UN policeman whose call sign was Moustache. He was French, and he and I had a sort of bit of a falling out before, because he told me, he said that you shouldn't have women in the French military because it would distract the men. And I said, well, in that case, you shouldn't have men in the French military. If they're so stupid, they're going to be distracted by the women. So we'd had these arguments, and I absolutely didn't want to call him, because I thought if I called him, all the UN people were running away and so on, and I thought they're going to stop me reporting, and I can't. So, so I kept going for a week without letting the UN know where I was, because I just didn't want anybody, didn't want to have that stupid argument about being evacuated. I was not going to be evacuated, I was going to report. Anyway, but eventually it got to the point where I realized I actually was running out of food, and I couldn't stay in this house. And also I knew the telephone line would go down soon, so I would have to go to a hotel. So I finally called Moustache. So Moustache, it's Lindsay, and he says, where have you been? And I said, well, I've been reporting. And this is why I love him. He said, I know you've been reporting. I need you in the back of my car so you can report. So I'm coming to get you now, and you are going to come round with me. So he came, and then I went round with him from then on. And at the end of it all, he said, oh, you're so brave and so on. And I said, so now do you think there should be women in the French military? No, he said, that will never work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Colin. I'm also a journalism student. In your career, how often is it that governments have actually taken what you and other war correspondents have reported on and acted on it before it's been too late?
You mean how many times we've made a difference?
Yes.
Very few. I certainly think that there have been times when, you can alert people to a humanitarian situation and aid comes in and so on, and, money comes in for aid and so on. I think that with the refugee crisis, our reporting did make a difference to some extent, in terms of sympathy and understanding, and particularly when you get iconic photographs like that photograph of Aylan Kurdi, who was a little boy who died on the beach in Greece. But it's very rare that you can actually point to a story that you did and say it made a difference. Marie always thinks that in East Timor, her staying in East Timor certainly made a difference to the international pressure about those 1,500 refugees who were in the compound with her. That made a difference. But on the whole, we bumble along, and we do our best, and you try and be part of a sort of a mass movement of information, which will do something. I wish I had a better answer than that.
Thank you.
I did once stop a really useless British cabinet minister get a UN job. I did actually screw him completely, and I'm quite proud of that. But anyway.
Thank you for that, then.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Matthew. I'm a freshman, but I'm undecided right now, but I'm seriously considering a journalism major after I listened to your lecture in my news literacy class.
Oh dear.
I had a really brief stint on the school newspaper that I plan on rejoining next semester because I just got caught up in everything.
Yes.
I know I get nervous just doing on-the-spot interviews with strangers. How do you do it?
Deal with that. Getting nervous. Okay, we all get nervous all the time. One of the things I was telling somebody this morning, I still hate ringing people up. I don't know why. I just hate it. I hate that when you say, hello, my name's Lindey Hilsum, you've never heard of me. I work for Channel 4 News, you've never heard of that. Yes, gosh, I'm really sorry. I'm a worm. I'm really, really sorry to bother you. By this time, why they're still listening, I have no idea. And quite often I ask producers to make the calls because honestly, I'm so useless. So I don't know. I think that actually maybe it's one of the things about being a foreign correspondent, because if I'm out there not in my own environment, it's easier. Because they don't know me from a bar of soap. I'm just some mad white woman, you know, so that's fine. But I think basically what you have to remember is that they don't know it's you. I mean, you know it's you, but you're just a person. And everybody's thinking about themselves and not thinking about you. And what is the worst that's going to happen? The worst that's going to happen is they're going to say, no, I'm not going to talk to you, or they're going to be rude to you, or you're going to feel like an idiot. You can probably live with that. You know, it's probably going to be all right, isn't it? I mean, it's not fatal, feeling like an idiot. Most of us feel like idiots most of the time. So I think you just have to screw your courage to the sticking place and do it. And it does get easier as you go on. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Josh. I'm a journalism major here as well. And I was wondering what you thought about the refugee crisis. Do you think that you're going to see more and more refugees kind of just go into places like Germany over the next few years, and you're just going to have this influx of, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people? And do you think there's going to be some sort of a clash with, you know, those countries and the refugees, or do you think places like Syria are going to end up like revolting and going against?
Okay, well, I think that the Germans are very clever, and I think that that young guy there had it right when he said, when I asked him, why do you think people Germany should accept you? And he said, because they have so many old people and I'm young. Because he's damn right. Because what the Germans did was very clever, because they do have a very big problem of an aging population. And so they thought, we'll take the Syrians. The Syrians are well educated. Many of them have engineering degrees. Nearly all of them are young, and they can adapt. So I think that the Germans will now put up the barriers. They say, hey, we took, you know, 1 million, and it's a large number. And there will be cultural clashes and there will be differences, but they will benefit from that. And then I think that as we get climate change, there is going to be far more migrants and refugees. You're going to have the climate change refugees, many of whom will come from West Africa, who do not have such high education and will find it more difficult to adapt, and our countries will find it more difficult to absorb them. And so, yes, I think the story of the world is a story of migration. We all come from somewhere else, and I think that that is going to be one of the major things in the coming years. And that is why we have to deal with it. We have to find ways of dealing with it, and we have to find ways of helping those countries to do better, because otherwise, everybody will come, and that is not. It's not viable. I'm not stupid. I might be sympathetic, but I'm not stupid. I know that you can't accept everybody, but dealing with migration is going to be the problem for Europe in the coming years. You guys can cut yourselves off a bit more, but not completely.
Thank you.
There's one over there. Sorry, there's two over there, Nicola. Yes, then I'll go over here and then you guys. Nicola.
Hi. Hello. I'm Nicola. In the beginning of your career and now, how did you deal with, and how do you deal with the fear for your own life in these dangerous places? What keeps you able to report and produce?
Yeah, fear. The question was, how do you deal with fear, and particularly at the beginning of my career, how I dealt with fear. I was far less afraid at the beginning of my career than I am now. There's nothing like being young for being stupid. And so when I was young, I didn't have any fear, or very little fear, because I was so determined to get the story, and I was so determined to be there. And I was always so horribly competitive that I was determined that X wasn't going to get the story because I was going to get it. And so I therefore didn't, I mean, the fear thing was a little, I can remember in Rwanda. So I'd gone from Rwanda to Burundi, and then I got a call from a friend who was an aid worker telling me that there were 1 million refugees coming over the border to Zaire, which was kind of miles away from where I was, and that I was missing the story and I was going to be too late. And so, what am I going to do? Anyway, and I found a lift to go from Burundi up to the Rwandan border, and then I had to go up a bit further and cross into the next country, into Zaire. Anyway, the lift I was with, they weren't allowed to cross the border. So I then hitchhiked. I hitched, and I got a lift with a priest up to the border, by which time it was dark. I then crossed the border by myself at night. I mean, my God, I would never do this now. I would never do, I can see Jen just shaking her head. I would never do this now, but I don't know how old I was, 20-something, I had to get the story. And so I crossed it late at night by myself, and I went to a hotel which I knew, which was full. And luckily there was a lovely Belgian guy who ran it, and he said, what the hell are you doing here? Where have you come from? And I explained. And I said, and I've got a hitchhike to Goma tomorrow. He said, I will find you a lift to Goma tomorrow. So he found me a lift. So I was 24 hours late on the story, but I got there. And now I think I would never do those things because I'm a little more sensible. So it's a hard question to answer. So how do I think Marie didn't have fear. Marie was fearless, and I think that was a problem. I think fear is actually a good thing. The reason human beings have a fear reaction is so they don't get killed. So it's good. But I find that when I'm in a really dodgy situation, I go kind of icy cold and very clear. But I think I think you have to power through it. I think it's always good to go with a friend or to go with a companion. I think that doing things by yourself, which I used to do, is insane. And I would say to all young journalists, do not do that. Do not cross the border by yourself at night. Always go with someone else. And if you're with somebody else, that helps on the fear, because you push on through. And if you really, really are afraid, do a different kind of journalism. Not everybody has to do this crazy stuff. There's plenty of other stuff to do. Okay.
Thank you.
Then I'll come back to this side.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming and speaking with us tonight. It's been really interesting to hear everything. Obviously, you've seen a lot of terrible sights that you haven't shared with us tonight. I was wondering how that's affected you on a personal level and how you cope with that and how you keep going back even.
Yeah. Coping with the trauma. So Maria and I were on a stage once in London with an audience of very earnest young people. And the first question was that question, how do you cope with the trauma? So I look at Marie, and Marie looks at me, and Marie says, Lindsay and I, we go to bars and we drink. Thank you, Marie. Had the virtue of truth. Other than that, at the moment, my answer is come to Long Island. Come to Long Island and spend a few months here and walk on the beach and hang out with the nice people in the journalism faculty and think about things a bit and take a bit of time off and do something else. I'm writing Marie's biography, that's what I'm doing here. And in all seriousness, I think it's hugely beneficial, and I have to thank Howie for that, and Kat. Because sometimes you have to take a break, because you have seen too many horrible things. And you have to stop, you have to think, and you have to do something else. And I think that also you have to just pace yourself as you go along. And I think that it helps if you have people you're close to, if you have husbands or wives or partners, if you have another bit of life. I mean, Marie always used to go sailing, and I go horse riding. And it uses a different bit of your brain. There's nothing better than doing 2 weeks on horseback to, sort yourself out. Mind you, except that after the war in Iraq, I just have to tell you this one story. The war in Iraq, we came so much closer to death on the horse riding holiday afterwards than we did actually in the war in Iraq. I can't tell the whole story, but we went on a horse riding holiday in Iran. So we went on a horse riding holiday in Iran, and it was this crazy woman who had all these stallions and one mare, and so we were all on stallions, which were leaping up like this. And we got to this one point where we got to there was like a ravine going down like this, and there was a train which went over. And the train looked down and saw myself and my partner Tim, two foreigners on horseback, and went beep, 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 whereupon my horse reared up like this and staggered backwards towards the ravine. Tim thought that I was dead, that I was gone, but anyway, somehow or other it didn't, it came down again. Anyway, then I had to get across a scree slope, and where the path had gone away. And Tim went across with his horse, and I couldn't get across, and he couldn't come back and help me because the stallions would fight. The impossible situation, and at this point I almost believe in God, because we'd been following the nomads from their summer to their winter pasture, and we'd seen almost no nomads because we were too late. But at that point, God sent a nomad. So a nomad appears, and so, because I'm there, by this time I'm crying and holding my horse, and the nomad appears and indicates that I should go across the scree slope myself, and he'll take the horse across. So I go across the scree slope like this, and he brings the horse across, and then he puts the reins back on, helps me get back on, and then he disappeared back up to heaven, which is where he came from. And we continued the story. We continued the holiday. Anyway, it goes on much longer, that story, but not now. Yes?
So we'll just finish these 4 questions.
Finish these 4, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is James. I'm not a student, but I came here. To go back to your point about America always responding to the last crisis, a few months ago I read a piece in the Atlantic about the cycle of American interventionism. There's a successful one, then a not so successful one, then one we ignore, and then the cycle starts again.
All of this,
Is there any way to break this cycle, or even should we break it, because that's kind of the price of living in a democracy?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and I wish I had an answer to it. I mean, I think that there has to be some codification of when you intervene and when you don't, and I think it should be through international institutions, because I think that when it all goes horribly wrong is when it's not through the UN. Now, I understand that means sometimes when you have relations with Russia, as you do at the moment, that there will not be intervention. But I think that the consequences of intervening unilaterally, or just with a few odd countries like Britain, it means that I think what we've learned from Iraq is that the consequences of that are far-reaching, and it is the law of unintended consequences. But whether you can ever break the cycle, I don't know.
Thank you.
Yes, lady behind.
Hi, my name's Kemi out of Banjo. I'm a journalism minor. So you touched upon this briefly, but is there any regrets that you have in your journalism career with your acquired knowledge throughout your lifetime? Is there anything you would go back and change if you could?
Everything. Everything. I think I told one class at one point, well, I have many regrets. One of my regrets is that the Ethiopian famine, I did not cover the Ethiopian famine because I had a broken heart, and I went home to cry on my mother's shoulder about some guy. For God's sake. I missed the Ethiopian famine because I had a broken heart. I mean, how pathetic is that? So I would definitely go back, and this time I would tell him where to go because I was busy. So that's what I would do. So that's one. But yeah, look, I have so many regrets about Rwanda. I think that my reporting, as I said, it was not spectacular. And now I did the best I could. It wasn't good enough, almost everywhere. So yes, look, I'm not Edith Piaf. Je ne regrette rien. I regret everything, all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Hi, my name's Caitlin. I was wondering about the impact that social media has had on your career more recently.
Yeah, I mean, as I said on the Twitter thing, I really noticed it when I was reporting the refugees and how much abuse I got on Twitter. You really, and I don't know what you do about it. Do you engage, you don't engage, and then you realize that half of them are Russian trolls, so they're not worth engaging with. Yeah, it has. I mean, it's gone through different things. There was a phase where my editors were always wanting me to blog, and now they don't want me to blog. And now they want me to stop my day when I'm reporting to, talk bollocks into the camera just to send it for some small thing on the web. And now I notice that the Channel 4 News online stuff seems to have no reporters on it at all. It just seems to be pictures and words across it. So I think, oh, great, it's my own program, and they think that I'm redundant. So, it's constantly changing. But yes, the good thing is that it means that there is a two-way conversation, even if it is sometimes rude, between you and the viewers, the readers, and so on. And that can only be good. And also, we get information through social media. I mean, Aleppo now, a lot of the information that we get, I mean, we have a Syrian filmmaker who works for us in Aleppo, but I'm on a WhatsApp group from the doctors in Aleppo. I get 100 or 200 sometimes messages a day from doctors in Aleppo telling me what's going on, and that is social media. So in terms of information, it's absolutely massive, and it's been incredibly helpful, but it's a two-edged sword, isn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kira. I'm a journalism major,
And when you came into our class, our news literacy class, I asked you about the genocide, I think.
Yes.
But what about your reporting were you unhappy with? Like, because you were the only American there, so you probably had more information than anyone. But like, what do you think you were missing?
What was I missing? I think what I was missing was understanding. I didn't really understand what was going on until quite late. I didn't realize it was a genocide. I mean, I had some understanding of the background of the country because I had lived there and so on. But I didn't understand that it was organized, or how much it was organized, how much it was directed from the top. And I think that, and Nicola asked me about fear. I was frightened. And I think that my fear, stopped me doing things that I should have done, of going out more and understanding more. I mean, and so, I just think that I think it was a failure to interpret the situation properly. That was my main failure. I could tell you, would you like to hear about more failures? I can do that. I mean, all the times my reporting's been shit, I can do all of that. But, maybe sometimes it hasn't been too bad.
Let me just ask you two things. One, tell us a little bit more about the book.
The book?
The book.
Marie book.
The Marie book.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm writing Marie's biography. And I decided to do that. Why did I decide to write Marie's biography? Because I think that she was the best war correspondent of my generation. And she isn't particularly well known in America, but she will be after my book. She is in the UK. And because I think that there's a particular, the way that, what I've been talking about and the way we reported wars in the 20th and latter part of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, it will change because of social media and so on. And the story of Marie is the story of that. It's the story of the conflicts of our age and how we reported them. And also because she's just so glamorous, She's just an amazing figure, and she's just a great person to write about. And the more I find out about her, the more amazed I am, and the more boring I realize my life is, and I am, compared to Marie. Oh my God, did she have an interesting life.
It doesn't sound too boring.
No, it doesn't, but that's because you don't know all the things I know about Marie.
So after you leave the dangers of Long Island,
yes,
and all the problems here, what are you going to do when you get back?
What am I going to do when I go back? Well, after I've had my holiday in Martha's Vineyard in New Mexico, I will go back and I will do whatever it is my editor tells me to do. And I should imagine that I will go back to Syria. I've been spending quite a bit of time in Syria in recent years. I go in on a government visa, which means it's sometimes difficult to find things out, but you can still find things out. The last time I was there was just after Palmyra was seized by the government forces from Islamic State, and we got amazing stories there. So I'll probably go back to Syria, I would think, and I don't know, more refugees, Iraq, Mosul, there's a lot going on there. There's no shortage of stories.
So just a comment and a final comment to one, you can now find Lindsay's work online. This is the positive impact of the internet, right? Yep. You now have discovered Lindsay the way we've discovered Lindsay in our school. So you can go on into Channel 4 News in London on the internet and get her dispatches. So that's terrific. And please join with me in wishing Lindsay Godspeed as she goes into. Thank you so much.